Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 6 of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Today we continue from where we left off last time, where we find ourselves in the year AD 1012. So if you like this and you're enjoying the series, like and subscribe and all the rest of the good stuff, and let us continue. AD 1012. This year came Alderman Edric, and all the oldest councillors to England, clerk and laity to London before Easter, which was then on the Ides of April, and there they abode until Easter, until all the tribute was paid, which was £48,000. Then on the Saturday was the army much stirred again against the bishop, because he would not promise them any fee, and forbade that any man should give anything for him. They were also much drunken, for there was wine brought them from the south. Then they took the bishop, and led him to their hustings, on the eve of Sunday after Easter, which was the 13th before the calends of May. And it was there that they shamefully killed him. They overwhelmed him with bones and horns of oxen, and one of them smote him with an axe iron on the head, so that he sunk downwards with the blow, and his holy body fell upon the earth, whilst his sacred soul was carried to the realm of God. The corpse in the morning was carried to London, and the bishops Cnut and Ælfheah, and the citizens received him with all honour, and buried him in St. Paul's Minster, where God now showeth this holy martyr's miracles. When the tribute was paid, and the peace oaths were sworn, the dispersed army, though widely as they were, as it was before collected, then submitted to the king 45 of the ships of the enemy, and promised him that they would defend his land, and he should feed and clothe them. AD 1013. The year after the Archbishop Ælfheah was martyred, the king appointed Ælfing to the archiepiscopal see of Canterbury. And in the same year, before the month of August, came King Sweyn with his fleet to Sandwich, and very soon went about East Anglia, and into the Humber mouth, and so upward along the Trent, until he came to Gainsborough. Then soon submitted to him Earl Uhtred, and all of the Northumbrians, and all the people of Lindsey, and afterwards the people of the 5 boroughs, and soon after all the army of the north of Watling Street, and hostages were then given from each side. When he understood that all the people were subject to him, he then ordered that the army should have provisions and horses, and he then went southward with the main body of the army, committing his ships and hostages to his son Cnut. And after he came over Watling Street, they brought the greatest mischief that any army ever could. Then he went to Oxford, and the population soon submitted and gave hostages. Thence to Winchester, where they did the same. Thence they went eastward to London, and many of the party sunk in the Thames, because they would not keep to any bridge. When he came to the city, the population would not submit, but held their ground in full fight against him, because therein was King Æthelred, and Thurkill with him. Then went King Sweyn thence to Wallingford, and so over Thames westward to Bath, where he abode with his army. Thither came Alderman Æthelred, and all the western thanes with him, and all submitted to Sweyn, and gave hostages. When he had thus settled all, then he went northward to his ships, and the population fully received him and considered him king. The population of London also after submitted to him and gave hostages, because they dreaded that he would undo them. Then paid Sweyn full tribute and forage for his army during the winter, and Thurkill bid the same for the army that laid at Greenwich. Besides this, they plundered as oft as they would. And when this nation could neither resist in the south nor in the north, King Ethelred abode some while with the fleet that lay in the Thames, and the lady went afterwards over the sea to her brother Richard, accompanied by Ælfheah, abbot of Peterborough. The king sent Bishop Ælfheah with the Æthelings, Edward and Alfred over sea, that he might instruct them. Then went the king from the fleet about midwinter to the Isle of Wight, and there abode for the season, after which he went over sea to Richard, with whom he abode till the time when Sweyn died. Whilst the lady was with her brother beyond the sea, Ælfheah, abbot of Peterborough, who was there with her, went to the abbey called Bonneval, where St. Florentine's body lay, and there found a miserable place, a miserable abbot, and miserable monks, because they had been plundered. There he bought of the abbot and of the monks the body of St. Florentine, all but the head, for £500, which on his return home he offered to Christ and St. Peter. A.D. 1014. This year King Sweyn ended his days at Candlemas, 3rd day before the nones of February, and the same year Ælfheah, Bishop of York, was consecrated in London on the festival of St. Juliana. The fleet of all chose Cnut for king, whereupon advised all the councillors of England, clergy and laity, that they should send after King Ethelred, saying that no sovereign was dearer to them than their natural lord, if he would govern them better than he did before. Then sent the king hither his son Edward, with his messengers, who had orders to greet all his people, saying that he would be their faithful lord, would better each of these things that they disliked, and that each of the things would be forgiven, such which had been either done or said against him, provided they all, unanimously, without treachery, turned to him. Then was full friendship established, in word and in deed and in compact on either side, and every Danish king they proclaimed an outlaw for ever from England. Then came King Ethelred home in Lent to his own people, and he was gladly received by them all. Meanwhile, the death of Sweyn sat Cnut with his army in Gainsborough until Easter, and it was agreed between him and the people of Lindsey that they should supply him with horses, and afterwards go out all together and plunder. But King Ethelred, with his full force, came to Lindsey before they were ready, and they plundered and burned, and slew all the men that they could reach. Cnut, the son of Sweyn, went out with his fleet. So were the wretched people deluded by him, and proceeded southward until he came to Sandwich. There he landed the hostages that were given to his father, and cut off their hands and their ears and their noses. Besides all these evils, the king ordered tribute to the army that lay in Greenwich of £21,000. This year, on the eve of St. Michael's Day, came the great sea flood, which spread wide over this land, and ran so far up as it never did before, overwhelming many towns and an innumerable multitude of people. AD 1015. This year was the great council at Oxford, where Alderman Edric betrayed Sigfyrth and Morcar, the eldest thanes belonging to the Seven Towns. He lured them into his bower, where they were shamefully slain. It was then the king took all their possessions, and ordered the widow of Sigfyrth to be secured and brought within Malmesbury. After a little interval, Edmund Ætheling went and seized her against the king's will, and had her to wife. Then before the nativity of St. Mary went the Ætheling west-north into 5 towns, and soon plundered all the property of Sigfyrth and Morcar, and all the people submitted to him. At the same time came King Cnut to Sandwich, and went soon all about Kent into Essex, until he came to the mouth of the Frome, and then plundered in Dorset, and in Wiltshire, and in Somerset. King Ethelred, meanwhile, lay sick at Corsham, and Alderman Edric collected an army there, and Edmund the Ætheling in the north. When they came together, the alderman designed to betray Edmund the Ætheling, but he could not. Whereupon they separated without an agreement, and sheered off from their enemies. Alderman Edric then secured 40 ships from the king, and submitted to Cnut. The West Saxons also submitted, and gave hostages, horsed the army, and he continued there until midwinter. AD 1016. This year came King Cnut with a marine force of 160 ships, and Alderman Edric with him, over the Thames into Mercia and Cricklade, whence they proceeded to Warwickshire during the middle of the winter, and plundered therein, and burned and slew all they met. Then began Edmund the Ætheling to gather an army, which when it was collected could avail him nothing, unless the king were there and had the assistance of the citizens of London. The expedition, therefore, was frustrated, and each man betook himself home. After this an army was again ordered under full penalties, that every person, however distant, should go forth. And they sent to the king in London, and besought him to come to meet the army with the aid he could collect. When they were all assembled, it succeeded nothing better than it often did before, and when it was told the king that those persons would betray him who ought to assist him, he then forsook the army, and returned to London. Then rode Edmund the Ætheling to Earl Uhtred in Northumbria, and every man supposed that they would collect an army, King Cnut, but they went into Staffordshire, and to Shrewsbury, and to Chester, and they plundered on their parts, and Cnut upon his. He went out through Buckinghamshire to Bedfordshire, thence to Huntingdonshire, and so into Northamptonshire along the fens to Stamford, thence in Lincolnshire, thence to Nottinghamshire, and so in Northumbria towards York. When Uhtred understood this, he ceased from plundering, and hastened northward, and submitted for need, and all the Northumbrians with him. But though he gave hostages, he was nevertheless slain by the advice of Alderman Edric, and Thurkdell, the son of Nafarn, with him. After this, King Cnut appointed Eric Earl over all of Northumbria, and Uhtred was, and then went southward another way, all by west, till the whole army came before Easter to the ships. Meanwhile, Edmund Ætheling went to London to his father, And after Easter went King Cnut with all his ships toward London. But it happened that King Æthelred died ere the ships came. He ended his life on St. George's Day, having held his kingdom in much tribulation and difficulty as long as his life continued. After his decease, all the peers that were in London and the citizens chose Edmund king, who bravely defended his kingdom while his time was. Then came the ships to Greenwich, about the gang days, and within short interval went to London, where they sunk a deep ditch on the south side, and dragged to their ships on the west side of the bridge. Afterwards they trenched the city without, so that no man could go in or out of it, and often fought against it, but the citizens bravely withstood them. King Edmund had ere this gone out, and invaded the West Saxons, who all submitted to him, and soon afterwards he fought with the enemy at Pen near Gillingham. A second battle he fought, after midsummer, at Sherston, where much slaughter was made on either side, and the leaders themselves came together in the fight. Alderman Edric and Ælfheah, the Darling, were assisting the army against King Edmund. Then collected he his force a third time, went to London, all by the north of the Thames, and so out through Claynger, and relieved the citizens there, driving the enemy to their ships. It was within 2 nights after that the king went to Brentford, where he fought with the enemy and put them to flight, but there many of the English were drowned from their own carelessness, who went before the main army with a design to plunder. After this the king went to Wessex and collected his army, but the enemy soon returned to London, and beset the city without, and fought strongly against it by water and land. But Almighty God delivered them. The enemy went afterward from London with their ships into the Orwell, where they went up and proceeded into Mercia, slaying and burning whatsoever they overtook, as their custom is. And having provided themselves with meat, they drove their ships and their herds into the Medway. Then assembled King Edmund the 4th time all the English nation, and forded over the Thames at Brentford, whence he proceeded into Kent. The enemy fled before him, with their horses, into the Isle of Sheppey, and the king slew as many of them as he could overtake. Alderman Edric then went to meet the king at Aylesford, that which no measure could be more ill-advised. The enemy meanwhile returned to Essex and advanced into Mercia, destroying all that he overtook. When the king understood that the army was up, then collected he the 5th time all the English nation, and went behind them, and overtook them in Essex, and on the down called Assingdon, where they fiercely came together. Then did Alderman Edric, as he often did before, he first began the fight with the Mysovathians, and so betrayed his natural lord and all the people of the England. There Cnut had the victory, though all England fought against him. There was slain Bishop Ednoth and Abbot Wolsey, and Alderman Ælfric, and Alderman Godwin of Lindsey, and Ulfgetel of East Anglia, and Æthelwold the son of Alderman Ethelsey. And all the nobility of the English nation was there undone. After this fight went Cnut up with his army into Gloucestershire, where he heard say that the King Edmund was residing. Then advised Alderman Edric and the councillors that were assembled that the king should make peace with each other and produce hostages. Then both the kings met together at Olney, south of Deerhurst, and became allies and sworn brothers. There they confirmed their friendship, both with pledges and oaths, and settled the pay of the army, With this covenant, they parted. King Edmund took to Wessex and Cnut to Mercia and the northern district. The army then went to their ships with the things they had taken, and the people of London made peace with them and purchased their security, whereupon they brought their ships to London and provided themselves winter quarters therein. On the feast of St. Andrew died King Edmund, and he is buried with his grandfather Edgar at Glastonbury. In the same year died Wulfgar, abbot of Abingdon, and Æthelred took to the abbacy. A.D. 1017. This year King Cnut took the whole government of England and divided it into 4 parts. Wessex for himself, East Anglia for Thurkill, Mercia for Edric, and Northumbria for Eric. This year also was Alderman Edric slain in London, and Norman, son of Alderman Ælfheah, and Æthelwald, son of Æthelred the Great, and Britric, son of Ælfege of Devonshire. King Cnut also banished Edwy Ætheling, whom he afterwards ordered to be slain, and Edwy, king of the churls, and before the calends of August the king gave an order to fetch him the widow of the other king, Æthelred, the daughter of Richard, to wife. A.D. 1018. This year was the payment of the tribute all over England, that was altogether £72,000, besides that which the citizens of London had paid, and that was £10,500. The army then went partly to Denmark, and 40 ships were left with King Cnut. The Danes and Angles were united in Oxford under Edgar's law, and this year died Abbot Æthelred in Abingdon, to whom Æthelwine succeeded. A.D. 1019. This year went King Cnut with 9 ships to Denmark, where he abode all the winter, and Archbishop Ælfstein died this year, who was also named Leifing. He was a very upright man, both before God and the world. A.D. 1020. This year came King Cnut back into England, and there was at Easter a great council of Cirencester, where Alderman Æthelwald was outlawed and Edwy king of the churls. This year went the king to Assington with Earl Thurkill and Archbishop Wulfstan, and other bishops, and also abbots, and many monks with them. And he ordered to be built there a minster of stone and lime, for the souls of the men who there were slain, and gave it to his own priest, whose name was Stigand, and they consecrated the minster at Assington. And Æthelnoth the monk, who had been dean at Christ Church, was the same year on the Ides of November consecrated Bishop of Christ Church by Archbishop Wulfstan. A.D. 121. This year King Cnut at Martinmas outlawed Earl Thurkill, and Bishop Ælfgar, the abundant giver of alms, died in the morning of Christmas Day. A.D. 1022. This year went King Cnut out with his ships to the Isle of Wight, and Bishop Æthelnoth went to Rome, where he was received with much honour by Benedict the Magnificent Pope, who with his own hand placed the pall upon him, and with great pomp consecrated him Archbishop and blessed him on the nones of October. The Archbishop on the self-same day with the same pall performed Mass, as the Pope directed him, after which he was magnificently entertained by the Pope himself, and afterwards with a full blessing proceeded homeward. Abbot Ælfheah, who had been unjustly expelled from Ely, was his companion, and he cleared himself of everything, which, as the Pope informed him, had been laid to his charge on the testimony of the Archbishop and of all the company that were with him. A.D. 1023. This year returned King Cnut to England and Thurkill, where he were reconciled. He committed Denmark and his son to the care of Thurkill, whilst he took Thurkill's son with him to England. This year died Archbishop Wulfstan, and Ælfric succeeding him, and Archbishop Æthelred blessed him in Canterbury. This year King Cnut in London, in St. Paul's Minster, gave full leave to Archbishop Æthelred, Bishop Britwine, and all God's servants that were there with them, that they might take up from the grave the Archbishop Saint Alfege. And they did so, on the 6th day before the Ides of June, and the illustrious king and the archbishop, and the diocesan bishops, and the earls, and very many others, both clergy and laity, carried by ship his holy corpse over the Thames to Southwark. And there they committed their holy martyr to the archbishop and his companions, and they with worthy pomp and sprightly joy carried him to Rochester. There on the 3rd day came the Lady Emma with her royal son Harthacnut, and they all went with much majesty and bliss and songs of praise carried by the holy Archbishop into Canterbury, and so brought him gloriously into the church on the 3rd day before the Ides of June. Afterwards, on the 8th day, the 17th before the calends of July, Archbishop Æthelred and Bishop Ælfheah and Bishop Britwine, and all they were with him, lodged the holy corpse of St. Ælfheah on the north side of the altar of Christ, to the praise of God, and the holy glory of the Archbishop, and the everlasting salvation of all those who there his holy body daily seek with the earnest heart and all humility. May God Almighty have mercy on all Christian men through the holy intercession of Alfege. A.D. 1025. This year went King Cnut to Denmark with a fleet to the Holm by the Holy River, where against him came Ulf and Eglaf, with a very large force by both land and sea from Sweden. There were very many men lost on the side of King Cnut, both of Danish and English, and the Swedes had possession of the field of battle. A.D. 1026. This year went Bishop Ælfric to Rome, and received the pall of Pope John on the 2nd day before the Ides of November. A.D. 1028. This year went King Cnut from England to Norway with 50 ships manned with English thanes, and drove King Olaf from the land, which he entirely secured to himself. A.D. 1029. In this year King Cnut returned home to England. A.D. 1030. This year returned King Olaf into Norway, but the people gathered together against him, and fought against him, and he was slain in Norway by his own people, and was afterwards canonized. Before this, in the same year, died Hakon the doughty Earl at sea. A.D. 1031. This year returned King Cnut, and as soon as he came to England he gave to Christ Church in Canterbury the haven of Sandwich and all the rights that arise therefrom, on either side of the haven, so that when the tide is highest and fullest, and there be a ship floating as near the land as possible, and there be a man standing upon the ship with a taper axe in his hand, whithersoever the large taper axe might be thrown out of the ship, throughout all land, that the ministers of Christ Church should enjoy their rights. This year went King Cnut to Rome, and the same year, as soon as he returned home, he went to Scotland, and Malcolm, king of the Scots, submitted to him, and became his man, with 2 other kings, Macbeth and Jamar. But he held his allegiance a little while only. Robert, Earl of Normandy, went this year to Jerusalem, where he died, and William, who was afterwards King of England, succeeded to the earldom, though he was only a child. AD 1032. This year appeared the wildfire, such as no man remembered before, which did great damage in many places. The same year died Ælfheah, Bishop of Winchester, and Ælfwin, the king's priest, succeeded him. AD 1033. This year died Bishop Merewite in Somersetshire, who is buried in Glastonbury, and Bishop Leafsey, whose body resteth at Worcester, and whose see Breteth was promoted. AD 1034. This year died Bishop Æthelred, who lies at Ramsey. AD 1035. This year died King Cnut in Shaftesbury, on the second day before the Ides of November, and he is buried at Winchester in the Old Minster. He was king over all England, very near 20 winters. Soon after his decease, there was a council of all the nobles in Oxford, wherein Earl Leofric and almost all the thanes north of the Thames and the naval men in London chose Harold to govern all of England, for himself and his brother Harthacnut, who was in Denmark. Earl Godwin and all the eldest men in Wessex withstood it as long as they could, but they could do nothing against it. It was then resolved that Ælfheah, the mother of Harthacnut, should remain in Winchester with the household of her king and son. They held all Wessex in hand, and Earl Godwin was their chief man. Some men said of Harold that he was the son of King Cnut and Ælfheah, the daughter of Alderman Ælfheah, but it was thought very incredible by many. He was, nevertheless, full king of England. Harold himself said that he was the son of Cnut and of Ælfheah at the Hampshire Lady, though it was not true. But he sent and ordered to be taken from her all the best treasure that she could not hold, which King Cnut possessed, and she nevertheless abode there continually within the city as long as she could. AD 1036. This year came hither Alfred the innocent Ætheling, son of King Ethelred, and wished to visit his mother who abode at Winchester. But Earl Godwin and the other men who had so much power in this land did not suffer it, because such conduct was very agreeable to Harold, though it was unjust. Him did Godwin let, and in prison set. His friends who did not fly they slew promiscuously, and those they did not sell like slaughtered cattle fell, whilst some they spared to blind, only to wander blind. Some hamstrung helpless stood, while others they pursued. A deed more dreary none in the land was done, since Englishmen gave place to hordes of the Danish race. But repose we must in God our trust, that blithe as day with Christ lived they, who guiltless died their country's pride. The prince with courage met each cruel evil, yet 'twas decreed to him that they should lead, all bound as he was then to Ælfheah fen. But soon as their royal prize bereft they of his eyes, then to monks they brought their captive, where he sought refuge from his foes till life's sad evening close. His body ordered then these good and holy men, according to his worth, low in sacred earth, to the steeple full nigh in the south Ælfheah to the transept west. His soul with Christ now doth rest. AD 1037. This year men chose Harold king of all, and forsook Harthacnut, because he was too long in Denmark, and then drove out his mother, Ælfheah, the relict of King Cnut, without any pity against the raging winter. She who was the mother of Edward, as well as of King Harthacnut, sought then the peace of Baldwin by the South Sea. Then she came to Bruges beyond sea, and Earl Baldwin well received her there, and he gave her a habitation at Bruges, and protected her, and entertained her there for as long as she needed. Ere this in the same year died Ælfheah, the excellent Dean of Evesham. A.D. 1038. This year died Æthelred, the good Archbishop, on the calends of November, and within a little of this time Bishop Æthelred of Sussex, who prayed to God that he would not let him live any time after his dear father Æthelred, and within 7 nights of this he also departed. Then, before Christmas, died Bishop Brite in Worcestershire, and after this Bishop Ælfric in East Anglia. Then succeeded Bishop Edzy to the archbishopric, Grimkedel to the see of Sussex, and Bishop Leafing to that of Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. A.D. 1029. This year happened the terrible wind, and Bishop Britmar died at Lichfield. The Welsh slew Edwin, the brother of Leofric, and Thurkill, and Ælfheah, and many good men with them. This year also came Harthacnut to Bruges, where his mother was. A.D. 1040. This year died King Harold at Oxford, on the 16th before the calends of April. He was buried at Westminster. He governed all of England 4 years and 16 weeks, and in his days tribute was paid to 16 ships at the rate of 8 marks for each steersman, as was done before in King Canut's days. The same year they sent after Harthacnut to Bruges, supposing they did well, and he came hither to Sandwich with 60 ships 7 nights before midsummer. He was soon received by both the Angles and the Danes, though his advisers afterwards severely paid for it. They ordered tribute of 62 ships at the rate of 8 marks for each steersman. Then were alienated from him all that before deserted him, for he framed nothing royal during his whole reign. He ordered the dead Harold to be dragged up and thrown into a ditch. This year rose the cester of wheat to 55 pence and even further. And this year Archbishop Edzy went to Rome. A.D. 1041. This year was the tribute paid to the army, that was £21,099, and afterwards the 32 ships, £11,048. This year also ordered Harthacnut to lay waste to all of Worcestershire, on account of the 2 servants of his household who exacted the heavy tribute. That people slew them in the town within the minster. Early in the same year came Edward, the son of King Ethelred, hither to land from Waleland to Madron. He was the brother of King Harthacnut, and had been driven from this land for many years, but he was nevertheless sworn as king, and abode in his brother's court while he lived. They were both sons of Ælfheah, who was the daughter of Earl Richard. In this year also Harthacnut betrayed Adolf under the mask of friendship. He was also allied to him by marriage. This year was Ælfric consecrated Bishop of York, on the 3rd day before the Ides of January. A.D. 1042. This year died King Harthacnut at Lambeth. As he stood drinking, he fell suddenly to the earth with a tremendous struggle, but those who were nigh at hand took him up, and he spoke not a word afterwards, but expired on the 6th day before the Ides of June. He was king over all England 2 years, wanting 10 nights, and he is buried in the old minster at Winchester, with King Canute, his father. And his mother, for his soul, gave to the new minster the head of St. Valentine the martyr, and ere he was buried, all people who chose Edward for king in London. And they received him well as their king, as was natural, and he reigned as long as God granted. All that year was the season very severe and many in various respects, both from the inclemency of the weather and the loss of the fruits of the earth. More cattle died this year than any man had ever remembered, either from various diseases or from the severity of the weather. At this same time died Ælfheah, abbot of Peterborough, and they chose Arnwe, a monk, for their abbot, because he was a good and benevolent man. AD 43. This year was Edward consecrated king at Winchester, early on Easter Day, with much pomp. Then was Easter on the 3rd day before the nones of April. Archbishop Edzi consecrated him, and before all people well admonished him. And Stigand the priest was consecrated bishop over the East Angles, and this year, 14 nights before the Mass of St. Andrew, it was advised the king that the Earl Leofric and Earl Godwin and Earl Siward with their revenue should ride from Gloucester to Winchester unawares upon the lady, and they deprived her of all of the treasure that she had, which was immense, because she was very formerly hard upon the king her son, and did less for him than he wished before he was king, and also since. But they suffered her to remain there afterwards. And soon after this, the king determined to invest all the land that his mother had in her hands, and took from her all that she had in gold and silver, and in numberless things, because she formerly held it too fast against him. Soon after this, Stigand was deprived of his bishopric, and they took all that he had into the hands for the king, because he was nighest the counsellor of his mother, and she had acted as he advised, as men supposed. AD 1044. This year, Archbishop Edzi resigned to see from infirmity, and consecrated Siward, abbot of Abingdon, bishop thereto, with the permission and advice of the king and Earl Godwin. It was known to few men else before it was done, because the archbishop feared that some other man would either beg or buy it, whom he might worse trust and oblige him, if it were known to many men. This year there was a great hunger over all England, and corn so dear no man remembered before, so that the cester of wheat rose to 60 pence, and even further. And this same year the king went out to Sandwich with 35 ships, and Athelstan, the church warden, succeeded to the abbacy of Abingdon, and Stigand returned to his bishopric. In the same year also King Edward took to wife Æthelred, the daughter of Earl Godwin, 10 nights before Candlemas. And in the same year died Britwald, Bishop of Wiltshire, on the 10th day before the calends of May, which bishopric he held 30 years, 8 winters. That was the bishopric of Sherborne. And Herman, the king's priest, succeeded to the bishopric. This year Wulfric was consecrated abbot of St. Augustine's at Christmas, on the Mass day of St. Stephen, by the king's leave, and by that of Abbot Ælfstan by reason of his great infirmity. AD 1045. This year died Ælfheah, Bishop of London, on the 8th day before the calends of August. He was formerly abbot of Evesham, and well furthered that monastery, that while he was there, he went then to Ramsey, and there resigned his life. And Manny was chosen abbot, being consecrated on the 4th day before the Ides of August. This year Gunilda, a woman of rank, a relative of King Cnut, was driven out, and resided afterwards at Bruges a long while, and then went to Denmark. King Edward during the year collected a large fleet at Sandwich, through the threatening of Magnus of Norway, but his contest with Sweyn in Denmark prevented him from coming hither. AD 1046. This year died Ælfheah, the eloquent bishop, on the 10th day before the calends of April. He had 3 bishoprics, one in Devonshire, one in Cornwall, and another in Worcestershire. Then succeeded Ælfric, who was the king's priest to Devonshire and to Cornwall, and Bishop Æthelred to Worcestershire. This year died Ælfheah, Bishop of Winchester, on the 4th day before the calends of September, and Stegund, Bishop of Norfolk, was raised to his see. Ere this, in the same year, died Grimketel, Bishop of Sussex, and he lies at Christ Church in Canterbury. And Hector, the king's priest, succeeded to the bishopric. Sweyn also sent hither, and requested the aid of 50 ships against Magnus, king of the Norwegians. But it was thought unwise by all the people, and thus it was prevented, because Magnus had a large army, and he drove Sweyn out, and with much slaughter won the land. The Danes then gave him so much money, and received him as a king. The same year, Magnus died. The same year also Earl Sweyn went out to Baldwin's land, to Bruges, and remained there all winter. In the summer he departed. AD 1046. This year went Earl Sweyn into Wales, and Griffin, king of the northern men, with him, and hostages were delivered to him. As he returned homeward, he ordered the Abbess of Leominster to be fetched him, and he had her as long as he list, after which he let her go home. In the same year was outlawed Osgod Klapa, master of the house before midwinter, and in the same year after Candlemas came the strong winter, with frost and snow, and with all kinds of bad weather, so that there was no man alive who could remember so severe a winter as this was, both through loss of men and through loss of cattle, yea, fowls and fish through much cold and hunger perished. AD 1047. This year died Æthelstan, Bishop of Abingdon, on the 4th day before the calends of April, and Sparhawk, monk of St. Edmundsbury, succeeded him. Easter Day was then on the 3rd day before the nones of April, and there was all over England very great loss of men this year also. The same year came to Sandwich Lothen and Earling, with 25 ships, and plundered and took incalculable spoil in men, in gold and silver, so that no man wist what it all was. And when then Abbot Tannet, and would there have done the same, but the land folk firmly withstood, and resisted them both by land and sea, and thence put them to flight withal. They betook themselves thence to Essex, where they plundered and took men, and wheresoever they could find, whence they departed eastward to Baldwin's land, and having deposited the booty they had gained, they returned east to the place whence they had come before. AD 1048. This year came Sweyn back to Denmark, and Harold, the uncle of Magnus, went to Norway on the death of Magnus, and the Northmen submitted to him. He sent an embassy of peace to the land, as did also Sweyn from Denmark, requesting of King Edward naval assistance to the amount of at least 50 ships, but all the people resisted it. This year also there was an earthquake on the calends of May in many places at Worcester, Wick, and Derby, and elsewhere wide throughout England, with a great many loss by disease of men and cattle all over the land, and the wildfire in Derbyshire and elsewhere did much harm. In the same year, the enemy plundered Sandwich and the Isle of Wight, and slew the best men that there were, and King Edmund and the earls went out after them with their ships. The same year, Bishop Siward resigned his bishopric from infirmity, and retired to Abingdon, upon which Archbishop Edsi resumed the bishopric, and he died within 8 weeks of this, on the 10th day before the calends of November. Then came Abbot Sparhavoc to him, with the king's writ and seal, in order he should consecrate him Bishop of London. Then the Archbishop refused, and said that the Pope had forbidden him. Then went the Abbot and the Archbishop again for that purpose, and the desired episcopal ordination, and the Archbishop constantly refused, and said that the Pope had forbidden it. Then went the Abbot to London, and occupied the bishopric before had granted to him, with his full leave, all the summer and harvest. And then came Eustace, the Earl of Boulogne, from beyond the sea, soon after the bishop, and went to the king and spoke with him, that which he would return homeward. When he came to Canterbury, east, then took he refreshment there, and his men went to Dover. When he was some mile or more on this side of Dover, then he put on his breastplate, and did so all his companions, went to Dover. When they came thither, they would lodge themselves where they chose. Then came one of his men, and would abide in the house of the householder against his will, and wounded the householder, and the householder slew the other. Then Eustace got upon his horse, and his companions upon theirs, and they went to the householder and slew him within his own dwelling. And they went up towards the town, and slew as well many more than 20 men. The townsmen slew 19 men on the other side, and wounded they not knew how many. And Eustace escaped with a few men, and went again to the king, and made it known to him in part how they had fared. And the king became very wroth with the townsmen. And the king sent off Godwin the earl, and bade him to go into Kent in a hostile manner to Dover, for Eustace had made it appear to the king that it had been more the fault of the townsmen than his, but it was not so. And the earl would not consent to the inroad, because he was loth to injure his people. Then the king sent after all his council, and bade come to Gloucester, nigh the aftermath of St. Mary. Then had the Welshmen erected a castle in Hertfordshire, among the people, Sweyn the earl, and wrought every kind of harm and disgrace to the king's men which they could. And then came Godwin the earl, and Sweyn the earl, and Harold the earl, together at Bevanstone, and many men with them, in order that they might go to their royal lord, and to all the peers who were assembled with them, in order they might have the advice to the king and his aid and all of his council, how they might avenge the king's disgrace, and the whole nation. Then were the Welshmen, with the king beforehand, accused the earls, so that they might come within the eye's sight, so that they were coming through thither to betray the king. Thither had come Siward, the Earl of Northumbria, and Leofric the Earl of Mercia, and many more people with them, from the north to the king. And it was made known that Earl Godwin and his sons, that the king and men were with him, were taking counsel concerning them. And then they arrayed themselves on the other hand resolutely, though it were loathful to them that they should stand against their royal lord. Then the peers of either side decreed that every kind of evil should cease, and the king gave the peace of God and his full friendship to either side. Then the king and his peers decreed that a council of all the nobles should be held for the second time in London at the harvest of equinox, and the king directed the army to be called out, as well south of the Thames as north, all that was in any way most eminent. They declared Sweyn the earl an outlaw, and summoned Godwin the earl and Harold the earl to the council, as quickly as they could effect it. When they had come thither, then they were summoned into the council. Then required he safe conduct hostages, so that he might come unbetrayed into the council and out of it. Then the king demanded all the thanes whom earls before had, and they granted him into his hands. Then the king sent unto them, and commanded them that he should come with 12 men to a king's council. And then the earl again required safe conduct and hostages, that he might defend himself against each of those things that were laid to him. But then were the hostages refused of him, and he was allowed safe conduct for 5 nights to go out of their land. Godwin and the earl and Sweyn went to Bosham, and shoved out their ships, and betook themselves beyond the sea, and sought Baldwin's protection, and abode there all the winter. And Harold, the earl, went west to Ireland, and was there all the winter within the king's protection. And soon after this happened, then put away the king the lady who had been consecrated his queen, Æthelred, and caused to be taken from her all which she possessed in land, gold, silver, and all things, delivered upon to her sister in Werewell. And Abbot Sparrowfok was then driven out of the bishopric of London, and William the king's priests ordained thereto. And then Oda was appointed earl over Devonshire, and Somerset over Dorset and the Welsh. Alga, the son of Leofric the earl, was appointed to the earldom which Harold had before held. And here we are at the end of another installment of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. I would like to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters: Doug, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, Charlene, Christopher, and Lynn. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next part of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, or in one of the other videos whenever you feel like coming back. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.